All right, let's go on to part 2 of pricing artwork. Somebody mentioned to me about the last video that what happens if you want to do production runs of work, and it comes to a little bit of a different pricing. And I changed my numbers here up on the board a little bit to help reflect that. When you're doing production runs, it doesn't matter whether you're doing ceramics, jewelry, t-shirts, whatever, your numbers are going to be different than if you're doing a single piece. A single piece, you devote all your energy to it, and then there's some ephemeral costs, and then you've got some. So the numbers are going to be higher with doing a single piece. So the numbers change a little bit more. Whereas this was, and it comes in the form of the margins. So there's going to be a little bit of planning. So we're going to talk about how to plan your workout, how to figure out your total time per X amount of Y, basically. So your material cost, instead of being 1.5 times margin, or 1.25 margin, which means that 1 out of every 4 items to 1.5, 1 out of every 3 items, you might have to have a little bit of an overhead for, loss of materials or using a little bit too many materials or whatever. When you're doing a production run, you've already mapped out all of your processes. You already know, for jewelry, for example, let's just say you're doing some copper jewelry. You already know how much material you're going to use on 20 necklaces. You already know how many findings you're going to use. You already know your total amount of solder you probably might use. There's not going to be a whole lot of loss. You might have one oops every once in a while, but it's never going to be like 1 out of every 10 or 12. It might be like 1 out of every 20. You're like, I don't know if I can sell this one because it's just not that good. So we're going to keep this we're going to move this down to 1.1. So that's about 1 out of every 10 or 12. It's not going to be that high when you're doing production runs, but you never know. You might have an off day and you just totally butcher a whole batch of stuff, and it's all a mistake. So, but that accounts for that. Your man hours, you're not doubling up all of your time because, oh man, there's like all this time I have to worry about, like, maybe going to the bathroom or getting some food, or dealing with what am I going to do with this painting afterwards, or finding storage or moving this thing around. You don't have the margin of man hours you would have with just one thing because you're working on a process, on a schedule. So I still include a margin in just my time because you never know, you might have one of those days where you just flop your work. So I include a margin of 1.25, which seems reasonable. You still got to handle your work. You still might have a little bit of like downtime where you're like, oh man, I totally don't know where this tool went. Or, you know what, I'm working on all this ceramics, I'm going to take a break, stretch my legs, because I've just been here at this wheel for, 3-4 hours, like cranking out work. And now I got to adjust to where all of my space is filled up and find out where I have room for the next thing. And so you lose a little bit of time here and there. It's like a nickel and dime sort of thing. Your overhead, I'd still keep that the same. Because, your firing might be a little bit more because the power meter might be, might charge you a little bit more on the meter this month. Or maybe you need to go ahead and run out and get an extra set of cones for your kiln. Or, oh man, this solder was twice as expensive. Why I have no idea. If you're working with wood and suddenly you're like, man, I have to go down to Home Depot and suddenly wood is twice as expensive. Let's let the overhead cover that. Little oddball things, let the overhead cover that, so they keep that at 1.25. And that still gives us our base cost. And plus, if we've already figured out, just as a rough number, even a rough number, of what our overhead is, that's a static cost. We're going to keep that number right here on the board from last time. Because that we've already figured out. That's $30 a day or $6 an hour. The pay. I've said it last time that maybe I might charge a little bit less if I'm doing technician work like ceramics and stuff like that, where I'm just throwing. But honestly, I probably wouldn't. I'd still probably consider my time just as high as I would anything else. So if I'm doing like, just some tech work, firing kilns, things like that, I'd still probably say $20 an hour because my experience still incorporates all of that technical process, even though it's more uh, more of a manual, less artistic thing. So, and because firing kilns can sometimes be very, very, very boring, especially if you're sitting there in front of a gas kiln for 6 hours. So we're not going to cover that. So let's keep this in mind as we work on these prices, and I'm going to go over some how to figure out the cost of time based upon materials, how many you make out of it, and some of the time factors I usually go through. And I'll be using cups and bowls for ceramics just to go over that. So, cups and bowls. Let me know my drawing point where I can safely write some notes. All right. So on cups and bowls with ceramics, I have a few material costs, and there is certain things like glazes. I'm gonna say glazes, as in like more anything I do after creating the work physically. So I'm gonna have three things. I'm gonna have clay, glazes, and let's just add one more just because I do know I have tool loss with this. Tools. Now, clay is pretty much standard. For a 25-pound bag of clay, if I was in Dallas, it would cost me $18. But I don't live in Dallas. Things would have to be shipped out to me. I don't live in Orlando anymore. Things have to get shipped out to me. So what a normal bag of 18-pound bag of clay costs, in order for me to drive to Dallas and pick up enough clay to bring it back, or to have it shipped out, it's a lot more. But for me to get clay, the last time I got it, it brought an 18-pound bag up to $32 per bag, 25-pound bag of clay. In that, I probably had a total cost of all my glazes and post-firing, like creative stuff, about $10 per 25-pound bag of clay. That covers all my stains, all my glazes, all my stuff like that I would need to make the bare clay look pretty. Tools. I don't normally see this cost because it's usually like, man, I totally broke this tool. There's $15 for that. Or, man, I totally have to create a new rib because I wore this one down, or this thing like that. So I don't normally see a tool cost directly. It's an indirect cost. So I'm going to split it up, and I usually account for every 25-pound bag of clay, I usually run $3. Why? Because it also gives me a nice clean number to the 5. That means for every bag of clay, it is a $45 cost as a whole. Now, let's think about how much clay that actually is. Now, when I buy clay pre-bagged, that's with water in it, so there's a water weight here. It takes between 1 to 3 pounds of clay to throw cups, bowls, things like that. I don't normally use a full however much per thing. So, but I'm going to say that it's going to bring me around 10 to 12 cups and bowls per 25-pound bag clay. And this number will come up when I have to, at the very end, split all my stuff up, which is $10 to 12 items. Now, mugs usually add in a little bit more time because there's handle production, or maybe I'm doing more crazy cups and things like that. So some of the times I'm going to add in, just because there is again, you might use it with a little bit of a different timing. Man hours will cover any sort of gaps I might have in the production of doing crazy things or more time-consuming production methods. But for every 25-pound bag of clay, I think it's safe to say 10 to 12 items. Now, let's go over the schedule. When you're working with ceramics, you can't do everything in all in one day. So I can't throw the cups, I can't trim the cups, I can't fire the cups, and I can't unload the kiln to glaze the cups and then fire it again just to get it back out again with a finished product all in one day. It's actually like a 2-week schedule. So, for example, day 1. Day 2. And I'm going to split these in half, because you'll see why. We're going to have a day 3 and a day 4, and I'll show you that. That's why we're going to do this. Day 5. Day 5 of your work week, if you're doing a production run with ceramics, will be your behind the scene stuff. That'll be all your, like, I'm glazing today, and I'm cleaning up the room, or I'm salvaging out clay scraps and this thing and that thing, and I'm firing kilns that day as well, and things like that. So, let's get into it. Day 1, we throw. Or we make. So it doesn't matter whether I make cups or bowls or I make sculptures. Like, you can even add this to sculptures or anything else like that. I usually use about you get the idea. So that day we throw. If I know that it takes me around between 2 minutes to 5 minutes per item to throw that clay, and then I usually have a little bit of setup time. Usually the first bag of clay takes me about an hour to make everything. I usually would throw 3 bags of clay in one day. That's 75 pounds of clay. That's not a lot of clay by any means, but it's, we know that I'll be using 3 hours worth of my time. 3 hours there. Now, on day 2, for every hour for this bag of clay, I'm probably going to have around 45 minutes worth of trimming. And that includes setup time, making sure everything's all correct, trim it all out, do my stuff. If I have a lot of stuff I have to trim, for some reason it takes me twice as long as that, I think we're getting away from production runs. So I'm going to assume I've already made this stuff so it just pops off, I go done. Off it goes. So I'll probably have about 2.5 hours for trimming. I'm also going to include 30 minutes of time just for finishing that work. That would be things like signing the work, putting in any sort of crazy sculptural design in there, maybe doing some slip work. About 30 minutes extra for those 3 bags of clay for stuff, just to, quickly get some stuff out. Because again, we're working about production, it's all down the line. It takes you no time. So that's another 3 hours. Now, as we start to get down here, this still needs a couple days to dry. And I'm saying day 5 will be here because if we have an extra couple days here, this is probably going to be like, if this was Thursday, this is probably going to be Sunday. Because again, we're going to link it back up to here. Day 3, we throw again. With another 3 hours. and 3 bags of clay. Then we trim and we finish. From here, we're going to be loading up our kiln. Because it's going to take us a couple days for it to dry out fully. We're going to stick it in the kiln. We're going to let it dry out. This is going to be for the bisque kiln. Loading the kiln for a bisque kiln is probably going to take me 30 minutes. So, here we have that time already accounted for. Day number 5. This is where we're going to go ahead and fire the kiln. In all, I'll probably spend around 3 hours looking at that kiln, touching that kiln, babying the kiln. Babying the kiln. And there's a reason for that. You want to make sure that what you're doing is it's well accounted for, because you don't want to burn your house down or your studio down or anything else like that. Or you don't definitely want to explode your kiln or melt everything inside of it. So firing your kiln, you'll probably spend about 3 hours on a bisque kiln, 3 hours on a glaze kiln, just tweaking dials, making sure, seeing if everything's all cool, and then going off and doing some other stuff. During this time, because we're doing a production run, probably of something else, we're also going to account for glazing. Now, this is not glazing this particular thing. We're probably glazing another run. But for sake of argument, we probably already had this much work already done. And it will probably take us, per bag, for every 1 hour we've thrown, it's 30 minutes of time for glazing. So, if I now have 6 bags of clay, that's going to be an additional 3 hours. And I'm going to say 3 hours of glazing because it doesn't take that long to glaze that much work. I mean, especially if you're doing like, oh, dip, done, dip, done, dip, done. You know, it's ceramics. It's not like it's like painting a mural or anything like that. It's just take you about a little bit of setup time. You glaze the stuff in a certain way. You say these 12 are going to be bowls. They're going to be blue with a white rim. These 12 are going to be, you know, so you already have your stuff already set up and you just do it in a production line. So, but it'll take you probably around 3 hours worth of time just between all of this right here while you're firing the kiln. And you'll probably be there for 6 hours anyways. So, might as well get your time in. And like I said, glazing could mean anything. I mean, you could also spend some of that time doing like a little twisty design with some of the with a little bit of some mason stain on top of a bowl, or doing some iron oxide work, just doing something crazy around the rim, putting some leaves or some stuff like that. Doesn't really matter. It's all glazing. So we've got 3 hours for that. And then it has to get unloaded. So the next day, after it's had a whole night cooling and doing your stuff, after you've thrown all your stuff, towards the end of the day, the following week, you unload. Okay. So you unload your kiln. Probably take you about 30 minutes to unload. Same production goes through. Oh, I might go ahead and actually sit there and take some of my glazed work, and on day 3 or day 2, load a glaze kiln. There'll probably be 2 glaze kilns for every 1 bisque kiln, so some things might stack up, and maybe you might adjust the schedule a little bit down the line there. But let's say you load the kiln, which is another 30 minutes. You fire the kiln. Three hours, and you see how that thing goes through, and then you know you might unload the kiln. for your stuff. So in all, we have 3 hours and 30 minutes here. Let's just say 4. This day, we're going to have 6. This day, we're at another 4 hours. Then we've got another, let's see here. Let's just say another 4 hours here. And then we got another 6 hours here. So in all, for 6 bags of clay, I've now accounted for 10, 18, 24 hours. That comes out to being a total of 6 hours per bag of clay. Eventually, somewhere down the line. Very simple math. But I now know that that's my overall time when I'm doing a production run. That's if I was working the whole time. Now, you don't have to work this hard. This could actually be a course of like a month or a year. You know your stuff, how far you're going to work down there. But eventually, if you worked a production schedule, and even if you just took this in singular little breaks, working down the time, this would still come out to being the same amount of time. You might have a little bit more whatever. So even if we said we're going to take more time on this, spread it out, which means you might have a little bit more setup time. Let's just say you have 8 hours per bag. An extra 2 hours for 10 cups. And I'll show you the difference between these two numbers here. Now, since we have our numbers, we also know what our overhead would be. And we also know what our man hours will be and our material costs per bag. So again, we just click it all into the formula, and we figure out how much that is, divide it by the total amount of cups per X amount of time, and then we just do our math. So for example, material cost. For each bag, it's going to cost me $45. Times 1.1, that's 10% more than the actual product is worth of materials. And I'm going to round up because I don't really like the 50-cent thing. So we're just going to take this math and we're just going to call it a straight $50. Because 10% of $45 is $4.50. Added to $45 is $49.50. So let's make 50. Our man hours. We now have two different numbers. One where we're working in a solid production run over the course of 2 weeks, producing work, and then producing work, and then producing work, and then producing work. In college, I ran this schedule daily. Yeah, it was not fun. All right, so man hours. We have two different numbers here. One for 6 hours a day, 6 hours worth of a bag. One for 8 hours worth of a bag. So, hourly pay at $20 an hour. We're looking at $120, or 8 hours at 20 is $160. Times 1.25. 1.25, that means for every 4 hours there's an additional hour. And I'm going to use my calculator for it because I'm a little bit on the lazy side right now. So that means this is 150 or 1.25, 200. So already you can see the difference about whether you're going to do it the slow way, do it over the course of maybe a lot longer period where you're not working so hard in a solid row, but you might have a little bit more lazy time where you might go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to sit here for 15 minutes and contemplate the clay, or maybe I'm going to do. There's an extra 2 hours right there. You built that cost in. Now, get rid of this. The overhead. Now we have two different overheads because we have two different sets of man hours. But it's not that hard. One is 6 hours, so at $6 per hour, because we already know what that is, comes out to being $36 times 1.25, which we know was from last time, I believe was $45. Yes. And then we have 8 hours worth of overhead. So, being as that's 48, is 60. Same bag of clay, two different ways you might work. That's 245. This one right here is going to be $310. Now, which one do you think is a little bit more of an equal cost? I mean, I think if I was going to go ahead and do a whole bunch of run, have my booth set up, or producing work for another place, that one would probably be the one I would be going for. For something where you're working with a large production run, sometimes you might not have a base cost. That might be your wholesale cost. Now, if I manage to get 10 items out of that bag of clay, that means that this is $24.50 or $31. That would definitely make sense if you compare it to places like Etsy, where a cup would cost you around 25 to 30 bucks. Right on par. If you remember on the last video, I figured out making one cup probably cost me about $65. And that was about right if I was making one cup. If I'm making a huge run, cost drops. It's the same thing with everything else. Jewelry, shirts, the whole 9 yards. In 30 minutes, I've gone through my whole schedule of all the steps that I take, how long it takes me for each of those steps. I've even worked out a schedule that I can work from. I've worked out how much my materials basically cost. I've worked out how much overhead I use. I've worked out how much materials I use per cup. I mean, you figure these things out very easily. So the more accurate you can become, the more accurate with the pricing you can be. Now, like I said, this I probably would not have a base cost. This would just be a straight wholesale cost. Because what I'm not making in profit, because it's just one item, I'm now making it in bulk, because it's almost like a guaranteed thing. Even if I'm selling cups at $25 a pop to some place like a restaurant or what have you, it's almost a guaranteed thing. I'm going to have, $245 worth of product sold for 10 cups or 10 bowls or for 10 little XYZs. I might go ahead and sit there and have a boutique call me up and say, hey, I want to have some jewelry in my stuff, jewelry in a display in my store for this. So you'd have 15 of this product in that shelf. So you'd have that guaranteed price of X amount of dollars. So you don't have that same need to make an actual profit off of one item. So that would be my wholesale. There would not be a base cost. The retail side of it can still sometimes double that. So if I was going to go ahead and attend booths and have to sell all these mugs, or I'd sit there and have to put it into a shop or a gallery or what have you to sell all these cups and mugs and bowls, still need to go ahead and account for retail. So you would probably see, I don't know, about 35 or 40 bucks for a mug. Is that reasonable? Depends on the mug. Would that compete with somebody who's selling mugs for $5 a pop? Probably not. So, but that's where these production runs start to bring down the cost. In one swell swoop, I've cut the price in half on my side, which means that I've probably also cut the price in half for everybody on the other side. So the larger the print run you have, larger run you have, and the more control you have, bigger kilns means less firings. Little things like that. It brings all those costs down. Maybe you don't have 3 hours of work that you're doing because you're doing like half of your stuff being slip cast stuff. Maybe you have an hour and a half for those bags of clay. That would again drop your time again. Maybe you know that maybe you're going to go ahead and probably not count your back end time here because you're watching TV at the same time, or whatever. Maybe you don't count that. It'd be foolish to do, but I know people who do it. They just sit there and say, well, glazing is part of the necessity of doing this, so I lose one day out of that. Not a fun thing to do, but that's what they do. Or let's just say you have materials that don't cost you $32 a bag. They cost you $18 a bag. So, instantly, that's already dropping an extra $12 to $16 a piece. Which again, drops your cost. Or maybe you use glazes that were recycled glass bottles that you just throw some frit onto, and that drops your cost because that's all free. Or maybe you don't. So there's little things where your material cost changes all of that. Very dry, very boring, but you get the point. And not much more to say about this. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. But this will work for almost everything from, like I said, from t-shirts to whatever. Anything that's a large run. Anything that you have a process with, even if it's paintings. Like I will go through and have days where I do production runs of paintings. And so my costs, I can figure out that I can sell paintings for $20 a piece if they're 4x6s or 5x7s, because I'm doing a production run. I work with so many of them at a certain amount of time, doing a certain amount of stuff for every single process of every single day that I do it. So then I can end up with a whole bunch of $20 paintings. Retail side, not counting booths, because I hate booth time with those guys, but oh well. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. They're down below. Have a great day.